That evening started like any other. I had no idea a simple knock on my door would lead to a conversation that would linger in my heart and echo in my mind long after the night ended. Sometimes life surprises us not with grand gestures or loud confessions, but with quiet words exchanged under the soft glow of a lamp, when the world outside feels hushed and still. My neighbor's visit that evening still plays in my mind, not because of what he brought with him, but because of what it uncovered within me. Before I share the story, let me ask you, where are you watching us from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to that evening when everything felt so ordinary until it wasn't. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner. The house was unusually quiet. My daughter had called earlier to say she wouldn't be stopping by, and the television murmured faintly in the background, filling the silence. At 48, I had grown used to evenings like this, comfortable, predictable, and wrapped in a sort of solitude I had learned to make peace with. I settled into my favorite chair by the window, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, when I heard a gentle knock at the door. It was Gerald, my neighbor. He stood there with a slight smile, his hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket. The porch light caught the silver in his hair, and I remember thinking how time had softened him in the same way it had softened me. "Teresa, I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice calm but carrying a certain weight, as though he'd thought carefully before deciding to come over. "Of course not, Gerald," I replied, motioning for him to step inside. "Come in. It's chilly tonight." The warmth of the house seemed to wrap around him as he entered, and I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed, as if stepping across that threshold lifted something off him. I offered him tea, and he accepted with a nod. We settled into the living room, the lamp casting a soft golden glow over the room. At first, our conversation was easy, light even. We talked about the neighborhood, the small repairs he'd been meaning to do on his fence, and the new family who had just moved down the street. I laughed at his dry humor, and he chuckled at my complaints about my stubborn garden that never seemed to bloom the way I wanted. But then, slowly, the air shifted. There was a pause between us, one of those silences that feels almost intentional, as if words were built in just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. Gerald leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his tea untouched in his hands. "Teresa," he began, his voice quieter now, almost searching, "do you ever feel like the years go by so quickly that you forget what it feels like to really be seen?" The question caught me off guard. My heart gave a small, unexpected stir. I set my cup down and looked at him. His eyes, though kind, carried something deeper that night. Loneliness, maybe, or the longing for connection. It wasn't the kind of question you ask just anyone. It was personal, unguarded. "Yes," I admitted softly, "more often than I'd like to." We sat with those words between us, the quiet hum of the house filling the gaps. It was strange how quickly a simple evening had shifted into something more profound. Gerald's presence felt different that night, not just a neighbor stopping by, but a man opening a piece of himself that he didn't often share. The conversation wandered deeper. We spoke about the years behind us, about regrets that had quietly piled up, and about the quiet joys that still managed to surprise us. He told me about his late wife, about the evenings he sometimes sat alone on his porch, just listening to the night, wondering what she would say if she were still beside him. His words were raw but tender, and I felt honored that he trusted me with them. I found myself sharing more than I expected too. I spoke about the moments I sometimes felt invisible, about how life as a woman my age could feel both full and empty at once. The honesty in our exchange was something I hadn't felt in years, and it stirred something within me, an awakening, almost, to the idea that companionship doesn't always have to come with labels or expectations. Sometimes it's just about being seen, truly seen. At one point, our eyes met and lingered longer than they usually would. The air carried a subtle tension, but not the kind that demanded action, rather the kind that spoke of understanding, of two souls quietly recognizing one another. I remember noticing how the lamplight softened the lines of his face, and how his smile, though faint, reached his eyes in a way that made me feel less alone. My heart beat a little faster, though I tried to hide it behind another sip of tea. Hours slipped by unnoticed, our words weaving a space of trust between us. By the time Gerald stood to leave, the night had deepened into a hushed stillness. He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame, as though reluctant to step back into the chill outside. "Thank you, Teresa," he said quietly, "for listening." I smiled, though my chest felt heavy with unspoken emotions. "Anytime, Gerald. You're always welcome here." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the doorway, the echo of his presence lingering in the warmth of the room. That evening didn't end with grand declarations or dramatic moments, but it left a mark on me, something subtle yet undeniable. Gerald's visit reminded me of the power of connection, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it and stays with you long after the door has closed. I didn't know then how much that night would stay with me, replaying in my mind like a gentle song I couldn't forget. The morning after Gerald left, I carried his empty teacup to the sink and set it down more carefully than I meant to, as if the porcelain remembered his hands. The house had that quiet, thoughtful air that lingers after good conversation, like a book left open on the arm of a chair, the plot suspended mid-sentence. I rinsed the cup, made fresh coffee, and tried not to reread the evening the way I sometimes reread favorite chapters. But my mind kept replaying little things. The way he'd listened without jumping in to solve me, the way our silence had felt companionable, the way the lamplight gentled the years on both our faces. I went outside and trimmed a few stubborn roses that insisted on sprawling over the walkway. The sky was pale and wide, and the breeze pulled at the wind chimes, their notes drifting across the yard like shy greetings. I had just tucked my clippers into the pocket of my cardigan when I heard my name. "Teresa." I turned. Gerald leaned against the fence between our houses, one hand curled around the top slat. The morning light found the silver in his hair again. He looked rested, but thoughtful, like someone who had put heavy things back in their places overnight and wasn't sure whether to lock the drawer. "Good morning," I said. He held up a book, thin, with a soft, blue cover I recognized at once. "You lent this to me last summer," he said. "I found it last night. Thought it was time to give it back." I laughed. "I was beginning to think you were writing your own ending in the margins." "Tempting," he said, smiling. "But I know the author." We met at the gate that had always been more symbolic than necessary. He passed me the book, and our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. Not because sparks flew. Life isn't a movie. But because the touch was gentle, not brushed, and held the simple electricity of being present with another human being. "Walk," he offered, a little tentative, as though the morning might refuse him. "Let me grab a sweater," I said. "I'm not done with your company yet." We moved at an easy pace along the familiar street. Darts were waking up around us. The hiss of a sprinkler, the putter of a lawnmower somewhere far off, a dog with too much enthusiasm for a Tuesday. We traded observations like neighbors do, whose maple was finally leafing, which house had new shutters, but our words kept circling back to softer ground. He asked about my daughter. I asked about the bench on his porch, whether he built it himself. He had. The only time his voice dipped was when he mentioned his wife's favorite paint color. He still had the empty can in his garage. "I can't make myself throw it away," he said. "Maybe you don't need to," I offered. "Maybe it can just stay there and mean what it means." We turned down a side street where the trees met overhead and made a green tunnel. The shade smoothed the heat off the day. He told me he'd been thinking about last night. I said I had too. Neither of us pretended we hadn't felt that small, careful shift. I don't know who first used the word lonely. It wasn't a confession, just a truth laid out the way you place a photograph on a table between you so you can both see it. "I don't want to rush anything," he said finally, almost to the ground. "I'm clumsy with this. Starting is strange." "I like slow," I said, surprising myself with how certain the words felt as they left me. "I like careful. And I like honest." He exhaled and looked up. "Careful I can do," he said, and his smile was small but real. When we looped back toward our street, the afternoon light had slipped into a warmer tone. I asked if he'd help me with my trellis, the one that leaned like it had lost confidence in its purpose. He rolled up his sleeves, and we spent an hour in the shared rhythm of simple work. He steadied the wood while I measured. I held the twine while he tied neat, patient knots. The scent of the vines, green, peppery, rose around us, and I couldn't help thinking how intimacy sometimes looks like this, not dramatic declarations, but hands that know where to steady, a voice that says a little to the left, and laughter that springs up when the string snaps, and both people flinch the same way. "Looks solid," he said when we stepped back. "I feel a little taller just looking at it," I admitted. We washed our hands at my kitchen sink, shoulder to shoulder, and he asked if I had any music. I found the old radio that still worked if you tapped it in the right place. Static gave way to a song we both recognized, though neither of us could place the year. The melody was the kind that knows the way to your ribs. He didn't reach for me. He turned the volume up a notch, then stood with his hands tucked into his pockets as if asking the room for permission. There are moments you don't want to miss because you were busy narrating them to yourself, so I didn't. I moved closer, feeling the music more than hearing it. "Would it be all right?" he asked softly. "If we just—" "Yes," I said before he finished, because I understood. It would. He placed one hand in mine, the other a respectful weight at my shoulder blade, and we swayed. The motion was so modest we could have been mistaken for people shifting their weight in a long line at the grocery store, yet it felt like stepping into a shared language I hadn't spoken in years. There was no urgency, no script, just the steady hum of a song that had practiced being a companion, and two people who had decided to let it be one. "I'm thinking about her," he said after a while, voice in my hair. "I know," I said. It wasn't a test. It was part of the room. "And I'm thinking about you," he added, almost surprised by his own admission. He pulled back a little, searching my face for a flinch or a frown. "I'm thinking about me too," I said, a small smile tugging at my mouth. "And how this feels right, not because it's grand, but because it's gentle." "Gentle," he repeated, and the words seemed to loosen something in his shoulders. When the song ended, we didn't pretend we hadn't been dancing. We didn't pretend it hadn't mattered. He thanked me. I said, "You don't have to thank someone for standing still with you while the world rearranges itself, but you can if it makes your throat feel better." We both laughed at that. He helped me set the table for a simple dinner, roasted vegetables and a salad with far too many tomatoes, because I overshopped whenever I felt hopeful. We talked about small things, because big things were already present and didn't need to be dragged into the center of the room. He told me about the sound cicadas make in August, how it had always meant the end of something and the beginning of something else to him. I told him about the jar of sea glass on my windowsill and how the blue pieces always felt like tiny sky fragments you could keep in your pocket. After we ate, the day tilted toward evening again. Light thinned along the baseboards and then pooled in the corners. He carried the dishes to the sink and hesitated, a clean towel in his hands, and I knew we had reached that part of the night where parting can either be rushed or respected. "Can we talk about what we want?" I asked. My voice was steady. My heart was steady too, or steady enough. He nodded. We dried our hands. We sat where we had sat the night before, the lamp making a small island of gold in the room. I said that companionship mattered to me more than labels right now. I said I wanted to keep feeling safe in my own skin and safe with him. I said I wanted to move at the speed of trust, which I had learned is slower than excitement, but faster than fear. He listened. He said he wanted to show up when he said he would. He said he wanted to make space for his memories without letting them become a wall. He said he wanted to build something that didn't require either of us to be 25 again, because neither of us was. And thank goodness, there are kinds of tenderness that only come with years. We were quiet for a moment, not because we'd run out of things to say, but because we'd said enough. "May I hold your hand?" he asked, like a man making sure he was reading the page correctly. "You may," I said, and offered it. Our hands fit in that unremarkable, miraculous way that hands do when they're not trying to impress each other. The warmth of his palm was calming. I could feel a little tremor, maybe his, maybe mine, and accepted it the way you accept your own handwriting, shaky on the first line, steady by the second. We stayed like that, sharing the sort of silence that grows a little garden in the middle of it. The clock on the mantel ticked. A car went by and then another. Somewhere on the street, a child squealed, the kind of sound that makes you picture open windows and a parent calling from a porch. I realized I wasn't bracing for anything, not for loss, not for disappointment, not for having to explain myself later. I felt, very simply, Crescent. "I should go," he said at last, reluctant but certain. "I want to leave while the moment is still itself." I nodded, understanding. We walked to the door. He stood with his hand on the frame again, familiar as a bookend now. He didn't lean in quickly. He didn't test a boundary and then apologize. He asked, "Would it be all right if I kissed your cheek goodnight?" "It would," I said, the words warm as they left my mouth. He pressed his lips gently to my cheek, a kiss the weight of a promise rather than a demand. When he stepped back, neither of us rushed to fill the space with chatter. We let the smallness of the gesture be large enough. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I'll bring the extra paintbrushes. We can finish the bench." "I'll make lemonade," I said, smiling. "Too tart at first, then better." "Like most good things," he said. After the door closed behind him, I didn't lean on it the way people do in stories. I walked back to the sink, turned off the lamp, and stood for a moment watching the last band of light lie down across the floor. I touched my cheek and thought about how, in a life full of loud moments that sometimes told me who I should be, there had been this quiet day that had simply asked me who I was. I don't know what anyone else would call what we began. Friendship, courtship, healing. Perhaps those words all fit, but none of them feel urgent to name. What matters is how careful it was, how deliberate, how it made room for both of us to be true. Later in bed, I listened to the house settle around me. Tiny creaks like the sounds a ship makes adjusting to the tide. I thought about the trellis standing straighter in the yard, the way the vine would climb